first time Private Hannah Lawson stepped onto the gravel of Fort Blackwood, someone snorted behind her. "Great! The paper soldier's here!" Corporal Johnson sneered, voice loud enough for half the barracks to hear. I froze, boots still caked with dust from the training ground, and felt every eye on me. Drill Sergeant Miller's bark cut through the morning air. "Lawson, step forward. Let's see if you can even keep up with your own shadow." The words landed like a punch, and laughter rippled down the lines of hardened trainees. I kept my eyes on the ground, heart pounding, trying not to flinch. The room smelled of sweat, coffee, and polished boots, a scent that would soon define my every morning for the next 12 weeks. I thought that was the end of it, but the real battle hadn't even begun. Hannah Lawson, age 26, former logistics clerk, no combat experience, small-framed, with a soft voice that betrayed no confidence, was not what anyone expected at Fort Blackwood. She carried herself carefully, uniform slightly loose, boots laced unevenly from rushing, name tag crooked. Details everyone noticed and mocked. Johnson circled like a predator, a smirk playing on his lips as he leaned in. "Hope you packed a diary in that backpack, Lawson. We'll need something to read while the real soldiers do the work." Some of the others chuckled, some just stared, uneasy. I noticed Private Luis Rivera out of the corner of my eye, silent, leaning against the bunk. He didn't say anything, but there was a weight in his gaze, a quiet acknowledgement that this wasn't fair. The morning PT test was brutal. Push-ups, pull-ups, a 5-mile run over jagged trails that tore at ankles and lungs. Every grunt, every stumble, every shallow breath was noticed, analyzed, whispered about. I struggled, falling behind the pack, feeling the sting of ridicule on my shoulders. Johnson barked from the front of the line, "Move it, Lawson! Don't embarrass yourself!" The laughter didn't stop. Mess hall whispers followed me like a shadow. "Is she even eating enough to survive this week? Bet she cries at night in her bunk." I kept my head down, ate slowly, pretending the words were harmless. But the words bit. Even the drills weren't safe. During a tactical simulation in the dense training woods, I watched my squad stumble over obstacles. My notebook was tucked under my arm, sketches and notes already marking the ground, the trees, and the angles. Nobody asked for my input. If I suggested a better route, it would be ignored, dismissed. Johnson would roll his eyes, Miller would bark a counterorder, and the whispers would grow. I wrote anyway, noting positions, tracing lines with a sharp pencil. Each mark was a quiet rebellion, a reminder that I was paying attention, that I wasn't invisible. Rivera noticed. He didn't speak, but he gave a subtle nod when he thought no one was looking. It wasn't much, but it was a lifeline. By the second week, the ridicule had grown sharper. During equipment inspection, I lined up my rifle, gear, and rucksack with precision, every strap folded, every magazine counted. Johnson kicked my pack, sending it skidding across the gravel. "Oops, didn't see your toy bag there," he said, loud and cruel. Others laughed. I knelt, gathering everything, breath even, face calm, but the jaw clenched tight enough to crack bone. A small shift in the air told me that some were uncomfortable, uncertain if my silence was strength or weakness. I thought the humiliation would break me, but it didn't. I folded my straps, wiped the dust from my boots, and stood, eyes forward. Night fell, and the barracks were quiet except for the scraping of metal bunks and the occasional whispered complaint from trainees. I traced the perimeter of my notebook again, murmuring strategies to myself. What I never expected was the subtle change. Rivera, sitting across from me, didn't say a word, but he slid a small water bottle toward me. That small gesture, unseen by the others, carried more weight than all the laughter and mockery. It was acknowledgement that someone saw me, that maybe, just maybe, my efforts mattered. I tucked the bottle into my pack without looking up, keeping my head down, feeling a small spark of determination ignite. Miller called the squad to formation the next morning. The sun beat down, relentless. I adjusted my boots, straightened my uniform, squared my shoulders. Johnson smirked, leaning toward another trainee. "Ready to fall on your face again, Lawson?" I didn't answer. I didn't flinch. My pen scratched across paper, charting angles and possibilities no one else cared to notice. Sweat ran down my neck, dirt caked my elbows, And still I moved silently, enduring, learning, watching. Something was building beneath the surface, a quiet strength, a patient readiness that even I couldn't yet fully understand. By the end of part 1, the barracks had settled into a tense rhythm. The mockery persisted, but so did my quiet endurance. The notebook was filled with careful notes, the maps traced, strategies drawn, angles calculated. Rivera's silent support lingered like a shadow at my back, and somewhere deep inside, I felt a pulse of something dangerous for those who underestimated me. Competence waiting to be revealed, skill waiting to turn the tide, respect yet to be earned. Something was coming, something that would make them all question the assumptions they had made. And I knew without saying it that I was ready for it. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The rain didn't let up that morning. It soaked through my uniform, plastered my hair to my forehead, and turned the training field into a slick, muddy track. The squad was halfway through a 5-mile endurance run, and I was falling behind again. Every step was agony, boots squelching in the mud, lungs burning like fire. "Keep up, Lawson!" Johnson's voice cut through the storm, sharp, mocking. "What's the matter? Rain got your notebook wet?" Laughter followed him, cruel and relentless. My chest tightened, but I didn't slow. I couldn't. Not this time. By the time we reached the obstacle course, I was drenched, exhausted, fingers stiff with cold. Miller barked orders, voice booming over the pounding rain. "Crawl under the wire, now!" Others dove, mud spraying, grunting. I followed, every nerve screaming, mud clinging to my skin. Johnson landed beside me with a smirk. "Watch out, paper soldier. Might drown in your own puddle." I ignored him, focusing on the end of the wire, counting steps in my head, noting angles and distances. Every movement precise, every breath measured. Rivera ran just behind me, keeping pace silently, never saying a word, but his presence was a small comfort. We reached the climbing wall next, arms shaking, soaked gloves slipping. I pulled myself up, boots sliding on wet rungs. Johnson was already at the top, calling down, "Need a hand, little girl?" The jeers hit like blows, but I refused to respond. I climbed anyway, muscle aching, fingers raw, until I reached the top and dropped onto the platform with a solid thud. No cheers, no recognition, just the rain and the pounding of boots on the mud below. I looked down at the squad, drenched and laughing at my effort, and swallowed my frustration. Quiet strength was my only shield. Later at Chow Hall, the warmth of the heaters couldn't dry the sting of humiliation. I sat with my tray, careful to line utensils and ration portions. Kelsey, a taller trainee with a sharp tongue, dropped her tray near mine. "Careful, Lawson. Don't spill your homework in the mashed potatoes." Laughter echoed across the hall. I lifted my head just enough to meet her gaze. Silent, calm. She expected a reaction. I gave none. I took a bite, steady, deliberate. Rivera slid past, leaving a small pack of extra protein bars at my side. Barely noticeable. That was all. Just a small nod of recognition that someone knew I wasn't invisible. The afternoons were worse. Tactical drills in the woods, navigating muddy trails while carrying heavy packs, rifles, and gear. The squad stumbled over uneven ground, miscommunicated, and panicked at minor obstacles. I followed, notebook tucked under my arm, quietly noting positions, angles, and mistakes. My suggestions, whispered under my breath, went unheard. When I pointed out a blind spot during a perimeter setup, Johnson scoffed. "Nice try, Professor, but stick to your notes." Miller barked at me to stay with the pack. Nothing changed, but I kept observing, mapping, planning, silently preparing for a moment when action would speak louder than words. Night drills were brutal. Crouched in wet grass, rain soaking through layers, I guided the squad using hand signals, adjusting positions based on patterns I had already memorized. Johnson ignored me, giving false directions. But Miller noticed. He didn't correct publicly, but a subtle nod of acknowledgement told me my observations were being recorded. Rivera sat close, shivering, silent, but he mimicked my gestures without complaint. That small, unspoken connection gave me the smallest spark of hope that endurance and patience weren't wasted. 2 weeks in, exhaustion and mockery collided in a single moment. During a mock ambush, Johnson's rifle jammed, leaving a gap in their perimeter. The squad panicked, shouting, stepping on each other in confusion. Without thinking, I lunged forward, instructed him step by step on clearing the jam, and redistributed the team to cover the blind spots I had noticed hours earlier. Chaos turned into order within seconds. Miller's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. Johnson froze, mouth open, shock replacing his smugness. For once, no one laughed. Silence filled the muddy clearing. I didn't smile. I didn't speak. I just finished organizing my squad and returned to the line, breathing hard, soaked to the bone, but steady. Back at the barracks, quiet fell heavy. I stripped my wet clothes, laid them carefully to dry, and traced lines on my maps with a pencil that barely touched the page. The small victories of the day, the blind spots corrected, the jam cleared, the squad saved from chaos, were mine alone. Rivera sat across, folding his gear, eyes catching mine for the briefest second before he looked away. A silent acknowledgement of shared understanding. That tiny fleeting moment mattered more than any praise I hadn't received. I allowed myself a deep breath, feeling a faint glow of pride that had nothing to do with recognition. But the tests weren't over. The following morning, we faced the final endurance challenge of Part 2, a combined arms drill with live simulation, including obstacles, mud, rain, and a timed reconnaissance mission. Johnson taunted from the start. "Try not to fall again, Lawson. We wouldn't want your notes floating away in the puddles." The squad laughed and I felt the sting, but my mind went elsewhere. Every movement, every angle, every footfall was planned, anticipated, calculated. I ran, slipped, pushed, and rose again. When the squad reached the river crossing, Johnson hesitated, misreading the terrain. Without hesitation, I directed the team to safer footing, prevented injuries, and spotted an alternate path to finish the drill in record time. The gasps from Johnson and the others were audible. For the first time, my presence had shifted the power dynamic, even if just slightly. The climax hit when we reached the final checkpoint. Miller called roll, checking equipment and performance. The squad looked exhausted, bedraggled, drenched, but functional. Johnson's face had turned red, jaw tight, pride crushed by the fact that he had been outmaneuvered by the very recruit he had mocked relentlessly. The rain hammered down, cold and relentless. But I felt a pulse of warmth that was fierce and quiet, a validation earned through grit, endurance, and silent planning. I didn't shout victory, didn't demand recognition. I simply stood, soaked, boots caked with mud, notebook tucked under my arm, heart steady, eyes forward. That night in the barracks, I cleaned my gear methodically, checked straps, magazines, and rifle barrels. I traced my maps again, preparing for the next day, the next challenge. Rivera slid a small note into my notebook, scribbled quietly, "You've got eyes they'll never see." That was enough. Small, private acknowledgement, a quiet victory. The storm outside had ended, but the storm within the squad had only begun to shift. What I had endured and quietly accomplished would ripple through the camp in ways I couldn't yet predict. But I knew one thing. I had changed the game. The next challenge would test it all, but for the first time, I felt ready. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The morning mist clung to the training ground, a thin veil over the muddy chaos that awaited. Today wasn't another endurance run. It was the simulated urban assault, a full-scale exercise combining navigation, reconnaissance, and live-fire scenarios. Every trainee knew this was the point where reputations were made, or broken, and mine had already been questioned enough. Johnson leaned against a concrete wall, smirking, rifle slung casually. "Ready to embarrass yourself again, Lawson?" he called, voice dripping with mockery. The squad laughed, the sound hollow and sharp in the damp air. I didn't respond. I clipped my gloves, checked my comms, and studied the map one last time. Every line, every street, every alley had been noted. I'd visualized this course 100 times in my head. The instructors blew their whistles, signaling the start. Chaos erupted as boots pounded, shouts overlapped, and simulated gunfire cracked through the morning fog. I moved deliberately, scanning corners, calculating trajectories, predicting enemy positions. Johnson barreled past me, confident, reckless, pulling the squad forward with him. They followed, laughing at my measured pace, rolling eyes at the careful, precise notes I jotted in my waterproof notebook. Rivera stayed back a step, eyes sharp, silently supporting my calculated approach. He said nothing, but his presence reminded me I wasn't completely alone. Minutes in, disaster struck. Johnson's team ran into a blocked alley, a dead end with traps set for training. But they had no plan B. Panic spread like wildfire. Shouts overlapped as boots slipped on wet concrete. My stomach dropped, heart pounding. But I didn't hesitate. I tapped Rivera's shoulder, nodded toward an alternate route I had mapped. Together we redirected a few stragglers, keeping them from colliding with each other or tripping simulated explosives. The team still led by Johnson didn't notice at first. He barked commands that only added to the confusion. I stayed calm, silent, letting action speak louder than ridicule. Halfway through the exercise, we reached the communications hub. The squad was supposed to relay encrypted messages, but Johnson fumbled the code, creating static in the comms. Voices over the radio crackled, orders lost, and the squad faltered. Miller's whistle shrieked across the field. "Fix it! Now!" Everyone froze, fumbling, blaming each other. I didn't hesitate. Kneeling beside the console, I traced the wiring, reset channels, and whispered instructions to Rivera as he relayed them. Within moments, the signal cleared. The squad cheered, but Johnson glared, realizing he had been outmaneuvered by the recruit he had mocked for weeks. My pulse was steady. I didn't celebrate. I never had. Discipline didn't need applause. The final segment was a hostage extraction simulation, the climax of the urban assault. The scenario: a captured comrade held in a building rigged with simulated explosives. Johnson charged ahead, guns raised, ignoring my earlier observations about blind spots. I followed silently, every step calculated. The team entered the building, chaos erupting instantly. My heart hammered, adrenaline sharp. One of Johnson's men stumbled into a trap, simulated fire sprinklers activating with a deafening clang. Panic surged. The others froze. I didn't. I grabbed the nearest trainee, steadying him, pointing toward an alternate egress I had marked earlier. Rivera followed, silently assisting, eyes alert, mirroring every move. Then came the moment that changed everything. As we reached the top floor, a simulated hostage struggled, and a false explosive triggered an alarm. Johnson froze, unsure. His usual bravado vanished. My eyes caught a series of symbols I had noticed earlier on the building layout, a hidden route that avoided the trap entirely. I grabbed a tactical radio, shouted instructions, and guided the squad through the safe path I had memorized. Every trainee followed, eyes wide with disbelief. We reached the extraction point intact, ahead of the scheduled time. Silence fell over the field, broken only by the dripping rain. Johnson stared at me, jaw tight, humiliation plain in his eyes. The instructors exchanged glances, nods subtle but unmistakable. Miller's face betrayed the first hint of respect. The power dynamic had shifted, quietly, irrevocably. Back at the command post, debriefing was tense. Johnson's comments were clipped, his usual mocking absent. "Lawson, your route adjustments, unexpected," Miller said, voice even but heavy. I nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without arrogance. Rivera stood nearby, silent as ever, offering the faintest nod of approval. The truth was undeniable. I had saved the squad from a simulated disaster, not through brute force, but through observation, calculation, and composure under pressure. The twist hit as the post-exercise review unfolded. The instructor, a stern woman named Lauton Ramirez, called me forward. She held a sealed envelope, stamped with the base's covert operations insignia. "This isn't meant for your eyes today, but it arrived early," she said, voice steady, sharp. I took it cautiously. Inside was a report detailing my previous reconnaissance missions and technical accomplishments, some of which had been classified. The evidence of my expertise, my prior fieldwork, my life-saving actions. It was all there. The squad had no idea. Johnson paled as he realized the depth of my experience, the credibility behind every silent observation, every precise instruction I had given. Rivera's eyes flickered briefly at me, a mix of pride and relief. That evening, the barracks were subdued. The fire in the lounge burned quietly, but conversation was sparse. Johnson avoided my gaze. Kelsey, who had mocked me during chow, lingered with a tray, watching silently. Rivera sat nearby, packing his gear methodically. I cleaned my rifle, boots caked in mud, uniform damp, notebook open on the table. The small victories, the precision, the acknowledgement from instructors, they settled in my chest like a silent warmth. I allowed myself a breath I hadn't dared to take for weeks. The final confrontation came the next morning, unofficial but unforgettable. Johnson tried one last jibe, smirking as he approached my station. "Hey, paper soldier, think you're the hero now?" His voice carried across the room. I looked up slowly, eyes steady, expression calm. "I don't need to be a hero to keep everyone alive," I said quietly. The room went still. Even the other trainees froze, unsure whether to laugh or stare. Johnson's smirk faltered. The authority, the recognition, the validation, it all rested in that one simple statement. No one laughed, no one jeered. For once, my words carried the weight my actions had earned. By midweek, the camp began to shift subtly. The instructors referenced my route mapping during exercises. Rivera began quietly following my lead without question. Johnson's mockery evaporated, replaced by a tension that spoke of grudging acknowledgement. The power dynamic had reversed. I was no longer invisible, no longer underestimated. My resilience, my observation, and my composure under relentless pressure had shifted the squad's perception. The quiet strength I had maintained, invisible yet unbroken, had finally asserted itself in a way that left everyone, from rivals to instructors, reevaluating everything they thought they knew. And as I lay in my bunk that night, exhausted but steady, I realized something. The storm wasn't over. There were more trials ahead, more challenges to prove that this moment wasn't an anomaly. But for the first time, I knew I had earned my place, not through loud declarations or brute strength, but through discipline, intelligence, and unyielding persistence. The recognition of my worth had begun, and nothing would undo the quiet power I had earned in the chaos of that day. Every soaked boot, every aching muscle, every silent calculation had led here, and the lessons had only just begun. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The morning sun cut through the mess hall windows, sharp and unforgiving, just like the glances Johnson and his clique shot my way. It was another day of drills, another day where my presence was tolerated, not respected. The chatter around me was loud, trivial jokes, whispers about yesterday's exercise, and the occasional jab aimed at me. Kelsey tossed a bread roll across the table, hitting the wall near my shoulder. "Careful, paper soldier. Don't strain yourself reaching for your food," she said, eyes glinting with amusement. The others snickered, but I stayed calm, slicing my eggs with precision, ignoring the noise. Rivera, as always, slid into the bench beside me, his expression unreadable. He didn't say a word, but his silent observation made the room feel slightly less suffocating. By mid-morning, we were back on the field for a live fire scenario, the kind that made stomachs knot before boots even hit the dirt. Miller barked orders like a storm rolling across the valley, his voice sharp, commanding. Johnson tried to assert control, barking directions at the squad, but the memory of yesterday's failures lingered, making him jittery. I followed quietly, surveying the terrain, noting cover, spots, blind zones, and angles that could be exploited. Every step was deliberate, methodical, and meant to test the limits of endurance and mental clarity. Then came the moment that would tilt the scales. A team member, Private Simmons, tripped near the simulated explosive zone. Panic erupted around him as Johnson shouted, unsure whether to advance or retreat. I didn't hesitate. Sprinting forward, I steadied him, whispered a quick plan, and guided him to safety through a narrow corridor only I had noticed during reconnaissance. The squad's chatter died down, replaced by stunned silence. Even Johnson's smirk had vanished, replaced by a flicker of unease. Back at the command post, the debrief was a tense affair. Instructors leaned on their desks, pens tapping against paper, nodding at the reports of how we had completed the simulation ahead of schedule. Ramirez's eyes found mine, sharp but approving. She didn't need to say much. The envelope she handed me afterward, sealed with the base's covert insignia, was a quiet bombshell. Inside were commendations, mission reports, and proof of field operations I had led in the past. Actions hidden from most, known only to the chain of command. Johnson's face paled as he realized what he had been underestimating all along. Even Rivera allowed the faintest hint of pride to slip across his expression. That afternoon, the final test loomed. A tactical navigation exercise through dense forest terrain, timed to the second. Johnson led again, overconfident, barking instructions as we maneuvered through thick underbrush. I stayed just behind, watching, calculating, anticipating. The trail Johnson took was riddled with pitfalls, steep inclines, hidden ravines, dead-end paths. I whispered suggestions to Rivera, who relayed them quietly to the squad. They hesitated at first, doubtful, until they realized the alternative path I indicated was safer and faster. Minutes later, we crossed the checkpoint, the squad intact, the clock ahead of schedule. Silence fell, broken only by the distant call of a hawk overhead. Johnson looked at me, his jaw tight, humiliation mixing with disbelief. The night settled over the base with an eerie calm. In the barracks, soldiers whispered, casting occasional glances at me, as if measuring my worth for the first time. Johnson sulked in his bunk, Kelsey avoided my gaze, and Rivera quietly organized his gear beside me. I cleaned my rifle, methodical as ever, mud still caked into the seams of my boots. Every precise movement, every silent calculation had left its mark. I wasn't invisible anymore. My resilience, my observation, my quiet competence had shifted the perception of those who had doubted me. Then came the public reckoning. A sudden announcement from Lieutenant Ramirez summoned the squad to the central field, a debrief for the top officers who had been observing remotely. Johnson tried to suppress a smirk, certain that I would be cut from the honor segment. Kelsey whispered under her breath, "See, paper soldier? Out of the spotlight again." I said nothing, just adjusted my gloves, checked my watch, and waited. Ramirez called my name. Every eye turned. Silence descended like a physical weight. "Lawson, step forward," she said, voice carrying effortlessly. The words hung in the air. "You will lead the tactical demonstration for the visiting officers. Your plan will guide the squad." The collective gasp was audible. Johnson's shoulders slumped. Kelsey's ponytail twitched. Even the other trainees whispered among themselves, shocked into sudden respect. The power dynamic had flipped, and it was undeniable. The demonstration itself was flawless. Every move I had anticipated, every alternative path I had mapped, every instruction I had silently prepared, came to life in front of the observing officers. Johnson's attempts to assert dominance fell flat, misaligned with the strategy I had already orchestrated. Ramirez allowed me to speak, guiding the team through maneuvers that highlighted precision, discipline, and safety. The officers nodded, impressed, their respect obvious in subtle gestures. For the first time, my actions were recognized openly, my skill undeniable. Rivera followed my lead, quietly supporting, his silent approval now a shared understanding with the squad. By the evening, the fallout was clear. Johnson's previous arrogance had left him exposed. Whispered comments, knowing glances, and subtle reprimands shifted around him. Kelsey, too, recognized the gap between her assumptions and reality. The squad had been redefined, not just by my actions, but by the undeniable display of confidence, composure, and leadership. The silent supporter had helped the plan succeed. The antagonist had faced undeniable reality, and the chain of command acknowledged the transformation. That night I lay in my bunk, exhausted, muscles aching, mind still racing. But there was a quiet satisfaction, a sense that justice had been served, not in vengeance, but in recognition of competence, resilience, and unwavering discipline. The lessons of ridicule, humiliation, and doubt had borne fruit. I knew the final chapter would bring its own challenges, but the foundation had been laid. I had earned my place. The squad had seen it. The instructors had seen it, and the power of quiet strength, calculated resilience, and integrity had finally reshaped the battlefield of perception. If this story resonates with you, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapters of this journey. The base was quiet that morning, the kind of silence that felt heavier than any shouting drill. I walked through the courtyard, boots crunching on the gravel, the air crisp with autumn chill. The squad was already assembled, chatter low, eyes lingering on me, not with mockery this time, but with something different, respect, curiosity, and a hint of awe. Johnson stood a few paces away, shoulders stiff, jaw tight. He avoided eye contact, and I could tell he was still processing the events of the past week. Rivera, quietly observing as always, gave a subtle nod, his small gesture enough to remind me of the silent alliances that had helped me survive the trials. The announcement came unexpectedly. Colonel Harper strode onto the platform, crisp uniform, polished boots catching the sunlight. His eyes swept the formation, pausing at me. "Effective immediately, Specialist Lawson," he said, voice clear and commanding. "You will lead the advanced tactical training module for all new recruits. Your strategy, your plan, will be the standard moving forward." A hush fell. The squad stiffened. Some couldn't mask their surprise. Others whispered among themselves, heads turning in disbelief. Johnson's smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by a taut, pale mask. Kelsey's ponytail twitched, hands gripping her gear tighter than usual. Even the instructors seemed momentarily caught off guard, the recognition of achievement clear in their subtle expressions. As I stepped forward to acknowledge the command, a rush of memories washed over me. The sleepless nights tracing maps, the endless runs through mud and rain, the sharp words, the jabs, the feeling of being underestimated at every turn. But each step had been deliberate, each decision calculated. I had endured quietly with discipline, and now it mattered more than any applause or verbal recognition. I felt my spine straighten, not from pride, but from the knowledge that I had honored the code I swore to uphold. The demonstration began in the training field. Squads of new recruits awaited my direction, eyes wide, unsure what to expect from someone they had only heard whispers about. I moved through the ranks, giving precise instructions, mapping out movements that anticipated obstacles, blind zones, and hazards. Every maneuver, every order, was executed flawlessly. The officers watched closely, nodding, murmuring to each other, impressed with the level of control, strategy, and composure on display. Johnson followed my plan reluctantly, his attempts to take initiative quashed by the obvious efficacy of my decisions. For the first time, the authority I had quietly earned could not be ignored or undermined. The climax came during the live tactical simulation. An unexpected complication arose, a communications failure that left the recruits isolated in a complex exercise scenario. Without hesitation, I recalibrated the plan, directed movements through hand signals and prearranged cues, guiding the squads to complete the mission safely and efficiently. The challenge was overcome without incident, the success unmistakable. Whispers of astonishment rippled through the ranks. Even the colonel allowed a small, approving smile. The squad, once skeptical, now followed without hesitation, trust evident in their precise movements. By the end of the day, the landscape had shifted completely. Johnson and Kelsey no longer spoke derisively. Their previous